Well, last night, incumbent Representative Chanz Green walked away from the Republican primary for the 74th Assembly District in Wisconsin with 57% of the votes. Well, Scott Harbridge with 43%. And while Green is officially moving on to November, there is some controversy surrounding the race. As we first reported yesterday, that's because there was a ballot misprint in the town of Summit, just south of Superior, leaving many candidates and constituents with questions about what comes next. Northern News Now's Car Cop heard from those involved today and breaks it all down.
Confusion over Wisconsin's newly drawn legislative maps led to mistakes at the polls.
Some mistakes like this, the statute does not give us a roadmap to what happens.
According to Megan Wolf with the Wisconsin Election Commission, during the primary election, voters in the township of Summit, just south of Superior, were voting in the 73rd Assembly District when they should have been voting in the 74th, causing 190 people who showed up to the polls there Tuesday to not have their votes for that particular race counted.
The ballot canvassers, the chief inspectors, they're all going to have to work together in part of a public process to figure exactly what the best course of action is going to be here.
That decision in the end is the ballot error will not bring a recount according to officials. That's because incumbent Representative Chanz Green's margin of victory in the 74th Assembly District was wide enough as he defeated fellow Republican Scott Harbridge by more than 1,000 votes. Still, Harbridge is raising eyebrows at the situation. In a statement released on his campaign website, he says it's terrible the township of Summit didn't get to vote for either candidate because of a ballot mistake. He says the voters there were disenfranchised. Harbridge is also calling for accountability after the ballot error, something Wolf says is in the hands of those at the local and county level, noting there is no set precedent on these types of situations in Wisconsin.
There, of course, could be legal avenues that come into play if this were to be litigated or if somebody were to file some type of sworn complaint before the commission, then that's where the commission's authority would kick in to be able to weigh in on these processes.
In Duluth, Car Cop, Northern News Now.
Car, thank you. Now, Wolf confirms all other races on the town of Summit ballot and in Douglas County were correct. We did reach out to Green for an interview, but did not hear back. We also didn't hear back from the Douglas County clerk today. Green will now face Democrat Gina Bruce in November.